A few months ago, I made a video about how to create a teaching portfolio for a job interview. So I thought it was only natural to create a video on how to prepare for the interview questions. And because I've been the one who has conducted the interview as a school administrator, I know exactly the types of response they're looking for. Hello, my Time Crunch teachers, Marielle here, and today's teaching tip is all about teacher interview prep. And as a former school administrator, I've been part of countless teacher interviews and have reviewed hundreds of teaching portfolios and resumes. I've also been a classroom teacher for over 15 years, so I know what it's like to be in your seat as well. If you're interested in exactly what you need to create a teaching portfolio and book that interview, I'll be sure to leave a link of the video in the description box below. In preparing for this video, I actually watched quite a few other teacher interview prep videos and read quite a bit of blog posts, and the vast majority of them are from the teacher's perspective and experience, which is great. I think that can be super helpful to see someone answer questions with their specific answers. But I've also wanted to give you a peek into what it's like from the interviewer's perspective. And in order to do that, I'm going to explain the spirit of each type of question and the type of answer a school might be looking for. That way, you can tailor your response to your particular skill set and values. I think there's something to be said for authenticity and answering questions with your own teaching philosophy. This video will probably be on the longer side because I want to explain the why behind certain aspects of the interview process. And if you have a good understanding of that, then you'll have a greater understanding of what approach you want to take when you answer the questions. Let me start with something easy, the interview prep. Look through the school website and any social media pages to try and get a sense of the school's missions and values. Do they excel in the arts? Perhaps they have a high percentage of English language learners. Is there a focus on community partnership? That sort of thing. You want to get an idea of the school culture and their focus. So click on the teacher pages and see what sort of things they showcase. Does the school environment seem like somewhere you want to be? And while you're digging around, see if you recognize any of the faculty or staff. And if there isn't anyone you know directly, ask your network if they know anyone who works there or who has attended there as maybe a student or had their kid go there. I know not many of us have the luxury of working wherever we want, but it's super important that you choose a school that has a culture that you want to be a part of. After you've looked into the school and asked around about it, it's time to note something that stood out to you about them. This not only shows you took the time to research the school, but it also will create a personal connection between you and the school or interviewers. So for example, if you notice they had an awesome school garden project, then bring that up in the interview. Say, I saw your beautiful school garden project. It's such a great idea. How did that get started? While you're at it, have a notebook, like a physical notebook that you have in front of you as you're looking at the school, because it's totally okay to write down your questions or note things that you want to highlight in your interview. There's no rule that says that you have to memorize everything that you want to say or reference in an interview. You probably don't want to sit there and just read straight off your notebook, but you can certainly glance at it if you want to reference it or if you want to remember the questions that you want to ask them. Let's talk about mental prep. I have a personal marked advantage when I go on an interview for a teaching position as a teacher because I've spent so many years on the other end of the table that I kind of know where they're coming from. And I will share with you a little secret that has helped put me at ease when I'm interviewing. They want you to succeed. No administrator wants to grill someone and make their experience horrible just to see if they could pass some imaginary test. And if you get the sense that that's their approach to try and trick you or make it impossible for you to get the job, then you probably want to consider whether it's the type of environment that you want to enter. Because if they're making it that hard or uncomfortable for you during the job interview, then you need to imagine what it's going to be like and what it's going to feel like to be a full-time employee for them. So, assuming they're nice, which they should be, know that they invited you in for an interview because they saw something about you or in your application material that made them think, hey, let's see if this person will join our team. Everyone wants to make a good hire. So just enter the space knowing that they're rooting for you and want to find a qualified candidate. Next, do your absolute best to try and figure out who will be at your interview. You can ask if you're invited via email. You can certainly write, thank you, principal's name for the opportunity. I was just curious who might be participating in the interview panel so that I can best prepare for the conversation. Or ask however you feel best. And the point is to have a sense of the position of the person who you'll be speaking with so that you can think about the types of questions they might ask. So for example, if the academic coordinator's coming, then they might ask about lesson planning or how you use data to inform your teaching. Or if it's a dean of students, then they might ask about classroom management or give you a scenario to respond to. So sometimes knowing who will be there will give you a little hint to the types of questions that they might ask you in your interview. Okay, let's talk about the day of your interview. When you eventually arrive at the school for your interview, be sure to get there early, and you better be nice to the front office staff. They may be too busy to have a whole conversation with you, but trust me, their opinion matters. The principal is absolutely going to ask them for intel after you've left. The front office staff is the front line of defense in a school, and they know everything and everybody, and they coordinate all the logistics. So you better bet that their assessment of you matters. Be polite, follow the instructions, make sure to greet them when you enter and say goodbye when you leave. And if you get there a little early and have to sit and wait, it's totally fine. It's not a big deal. You can just use that time to review your portfolio and think through some of your answers. All right, now it's time for the specific questions. Chances are the first question is going to be something along the lines of, tell us about yourself, or why did you apply for this position or grade or subject, that type of question. This will be a relatively easy question that allows you to ease into the conversation and warm up to the process. So have a short, concise answer ready. This is not the time to launch into your life story. I know it's super common when you're nervous, or for when some people are nervous like me, to just start rambling and talking, but it's totally fine if your answer is short. There's no reason why it needs to go on forever. So you want to answer something like this. I've been a teacher for the past 3 years, 2 of which were in 4th grade and 1 in 3rd. And I absolutely love teaching, especially teaching the writing process and getting students excited about expressing themselves in the written form. And when I saw a position open in your school and district, I applied straight away because of all the good things I've heard about your community. They basically want you to give a concise report of your resume and why you're sitting in front of them. Now, sometimes when candidates are answering this question, they will sometimes go into the reasons of why they became a teacher, which is super great, but you don't necessarily need to go through your whole, like high school and college and credentialing trajectory unless there's something in there of note that you want to share. All of that information's in your resume, so what they're really looking for is what type of person are you and why are you interested in this position with them today. Next, chances are super high that they're going to ask you a classroom management question. In my portfolio prep video, I explain my classroom management plan and how it's extremely important to have you fill out some sort of template. I've included the one from my prior video, but you can really use any template. The point is to go through the exercise. So if you have to put your plan down in writing on paper, you're much more likely to commit it to memory. It's going to feel more natural for you to respond authentically since you've already put it into words. Basically, they're looking for this in the answer. Do you have a plan? Currently, I don't use external rewards or any of those sort of systems in my class, like class points or prizes. However, I would absolutely hire a teacher who does if they can explain what their plan is, why it's successful, and how it motivates students. And please, please, please don't just focus on the rewards or consequences of your management plan. What they're really looking for is, What do you do that's preventative? How do you get to know your students? What does parent outreach look like? How do you build and maintain relationships throughout the school year? That's what makes a good classroom management plan. So, what sort of strategies do you use to prevent major behavior issues or disruptions from happening in the first place? So for me, it's all about building rapport with my students. I really get to know them. And then there's a huge focus on routines and procedures so that things are predictable for my students. It's my personal belief that a student can't learn if they are in a constant state of anxiety. So it's my job to reduce that anxiety as much as I can in the environment that I control in my classroom. Another thing you might want to have prepared are some specific anecdotes because they might ask you something like, tell us about a time you had a challenging student and how you dealt with the behavior. So have a situation already to explain. Or they might ask you, tell us about a time a lesson didn't go as planned. While these questions on the surface sound like they're focused on understanding how you overcome obstacles, well, I mean, like they are, but they're also trying to get at this. What did you learn? How adaptable are you? It's totally fine to admit you made a mistake in your career, and because I've made many, but the important part is what did you learn and how did you respond the next time you were confronted with a similar situation? So, for example, I once had a student get super upset because I called him out publicly for something he didn't end up doing. I accused him of like writing on his desk with a pen, and it ended up not being him. What I learned in that interaction, besides being wrong, is that I had to make things right and admit to this student, but more importantly, I had to apologize, and the apology had to be public too. I had to say in front of his classmates, hey guys, yesterday I made a mistake and I want to take this time to apologize to so and so because what I thought was wrong. Because the accusation was public, the apology needed to be public too. And guess what I learned? First of all, praise in public and discipline in private, but more importantly, students do not expect perfection. And a teacher who is willing to admit their mistakes is one who can build trust because kids can feel super vulnerable in a classroom setting. I mean, it's really hard when you're learning something new and you're making a ton of mistakes in front of your peers. So if you have a teacher who is willing to admit when they've goofed up, it makes them human and it allows everyone to have some grace in tough moments. Okay, if you get a scenario-based question and you don't have a response right off the top of your head of how you might address it, here's what I want you to do instead. I want you to reverse engineer the problem. So, for example, say that they ask you, what would you do if students didn't understand the writing assignment and aren't meeting your expectations? So, what they're looking for is, can you identify the issue? And then, what is your plan for addressing the misconceptions your students have? So, for example, maybe they weren't able to start writing because they needed more background knowledge on the topic. Maybe it's as simple as discussing the prompt and brainstorming responses together. Or maybe they didn't meet the expectations of the assignment. They all wrote something, but it didn't meet the expectations because they just needed to see the grading rubric at the beginning so that they understood the expectation for the final product. So identifying the whys or the what's behind why they didn't meet that expectation allows you to kind of go backwards and see what you need to fix. I mean, there's lots of reasons why a student might not meet an expectation, but what the interviewers are looking for is, what is your strategy for identifying the obstacles and then resolving them? You also might get a question around something about teamwork or collaboration or how you handle feedback. And these questions are obvious because they want to make sure you know how to work with others. Teaching is a team sport, and you're going to have some flexibility and figure out how to work with others. And sometimes it can be a little messy. So, how do you handle miscommunication? How do you set expectations early so that everyone's on the same page? What happens when you have to have a challenging conversation with a colleague? All these questions revolve around your ability to collaborate and work with others. They also get to my personal preference when I was interviewing teachers. Want to know what quality I was looking for in a candidate? It was not content knowledge or years of experience. It was coachability. I would rather take a brand new, totally green teacher who was coachable than a veteran teacher with a wealth of experience who was stuck in their ways and unwilling to learn a new approach. I mean, if you've ever taught, even for just one day, you know that flexibility and adaptability are key attributes to have in the classroom. So when given a scenario question, explain what the challenge was, what you learned from it, and what you would do differently from that point forward. And again, as a new teacher, maybe the answer isn't just you. Maybe what they're looking for is, do you know how to look for help or assistance or to basically help yourself? Is there a team lead you could talk to? Could you check in with some sort of mentor teacher or somebody else? So it's not always you having to have the answer. Sometimes it's simple as, do you know what resources to access in order to help yourself? All right, the next scenario is an easy one. They're probably going to ask you to walk through a typical lesson or perhaps your favorite lesson or most successful lesson. And there's lots of different ways to answer this question, but basically they're looking for, do you have a plan or do you have a system for your lessons? Do you know how to look at the big picture or long range plan and then boil that down to discrete lessons that you implement with intention? Are you reviewing key concepts from the prior lesson before you begin a new one? Do you take the time to figure out what your students know already about a topic? Are you setting learning goals or creating essential questions to guide your instruction? And of course, is there some element of engagement or fun thrown in to motivate the students? So this is actually a perfect time to pull out your portfolio and show a few examples of your lessons and walk through the process. So walk them through step by step and show that you think about the process and how you plan, implement, and reflect on a lesson for your students. Also, what do you include that shows that students have met the learning targets? Don't just move on to the next lesson. What do you do to check for learning so that you know what to teach the next day? Speaking of checking for understanding, you might get asked a question about data or assessments. So, how does data inform your teaching? How do you review assessments in order to support students? That type of thing. And this is the type of question where you could be the type of teacher who does a deep dive on data, or you could be the kind of teacher who's just sort of learning how to interpret data and assessments. So as long as you're honest about that, I think you'll be okay. This area is important as a teacher, but it's not the most important part of being a teacher. It's also an aspect of teaching that can be easy to assist you with once you're part of the team. You might also get asked a question about how you integrate technology or how you differentiate lessons. These are both important, but they're also very teacher specific. So feel free to answer with the specific methods you've used in your classroom. So for me, in terms of differentiation, I might need to think about my student population. Are there students with 504 plans or IEPs? If so, I'm going to have to implement the proper accommodations or modifications for their students. Do you have English language learners? Perhaps you need to integrate elements of vocabulary support or visuals like graphic organizers into your lessons. So differentiation for me isn't lesson specific, it's student specific. So I've learned to adapt my lessons around my students' needs. Okay, say you get asked a question about an area that you don't really have experience in. It's okay to admit that as long as you talk about how you're going to address that learning gap. So for example, when I moved from teaching middle school down to second grade, it had been a while since I taught phonics. So that was something I talked about in my interview, that I wanted to focus on preparation for that position by reviewing more of my phonics instruction and working with the team lead in order to implement it well with the students. If you're struggling on finding an answer to a question, or maybe you get too much in your own head about how you're supposed to answer or what you think the right answer is, I want you to remember this. Put the student's best interest at the heart of your response. Focus on the students more than yourself. If you put the students at the center of how you answer a question, then chances are you're going to get to the heart of the issue. Another sort of funny way to think about a teacher interview question is this. In a teacher interview, there isn't one right answer for each question, but boy, can there be a wrong one. Let me give you an example. I was once part of an interview where the candidate was asked something along the lines of, what's a challenge for you in education? Which is the type of question that could go like a lot of different ways. You could answer something like making sure students meet district benchmarks while also allowing them to learn at a pace that's supportive and encouraging. Or maybe you are beginning a new content area or grade level. There's like lots of ways you can answer this question that are perfectly reasonable. Want to know what the candidate answered to what's your greatest challenge in education? Stupid people. Yeah, they literally said that stupid people was their greatest challenge in education. Lots of options for acceptable answers on that one, but one also very obvious wrong one. So not only was their response jarring, but the concept that they could even label someone as stupid and then give up on them and then vocalize that in an interview tells me volumes about their approach to people in education. So if you put the students at the center of your response and you talk about how you would support them, you'll do fine. I can train up a teacher who is coachable, who fundamentally enjoys being around kids. That's not a problem, but it's much harder to work with someone who refuses to adapt or genuinely doesn't like kids. Also, don't feel like you have to answer a question immediately. It's perfectly okay to say something like, oh, that's a great question. Let me take a minute to reflect on how I would respond to that situation. I personally like it when people are thoughtful. I think it shows that they care about their responses and are intentional about the outcomes. Another thing to think about is to try and remain positive through your answers. It's really hard to sit across from someone who only gripes about all the negative aspects of their prior school or the kids or the colleagues. It's okay if you have challenges, but there's really no reason to complain about that in a job interview. It doesn't serve any real purpose, and honestly, it can only really work against you. Now, this is just a small sampling of the types of questions that might come up in an interview, and I'm sure I've missed some key ones. So if you have any questions you'd like assistance with, or if you've ever been asked some good ones in an interview, please feel free to leave them in the comment section below. I've always found it super helpful to run my responses by other educators to see how they respond, since that often gives me ideas of situations or responses that I hadn't thought of before. And maybe this could even lead to another video where I follow up with some of my responses or what the community has said to those questions. Here is my favorite part of the interview process, the part where you get to ask the school questions. Keep in mind, you might not have a lot of time for this section, so plan on having only about maybe 2 to 4 questions ready. And make sure that they're not the type of questions you should be asking after you have been offered the job and hired. So for example, don't ask about salaries or days off or the bell schedule or something like that. None of that really matters unless you've actually been offered the position. One of the areas I like to ask about are collaboration opportunities. Being on a strong grade level or department team is extremely important to me. And as much as I love teaching, I'm entering a position to learn, and I want to learn from the best teams possible. So I'm going to ask a question about what the grade level collaborations and teams look like. I might say something like, what does collaboration look like for your second grade teachers? Or are there opportunities to work together or plan as a team? Your administration will likely know which grade levels or department work well together. And if you're really lucky, maybe someone from that team is actually on your interview. As a teacher, another thing I want to know is how receptive the administration is to teacher input, but I can't just straight up say like, hey, do you listen to your teachers? So instead, I like to ask something like, What was the last change you implemented based on faculty input or ideas? What I like about this is that it could be either teacher feedback on something they didn't like and wanted to see changed, or it could be something exciting and interesting that a teacher proposed to the administration and they supported them in seeing the project through completion. There's actually lots of different ways that this could go, but most importantly, the school should have an answer. And how they respond to this question can tell you a lot about how your potential new school will listen to you and your colleagues. If their answer doesn't feel thoughtful, then maybe this isn't a community you want to be part of. If you're a brand new teacher or even new to the district, you're also going to want to ask about teacher support. So, is there a mentoring program? What does professional development look like? Will there be a team lead you can collaborate with? That sort of thing. If you are a first year teacher, you are absolutely going to want to have a support system in place so that you don't feel overwhelmed by the new position. You could also ask about parent involvement or maybe have specific questions about the school curriculum. All of these are perfectly fine. Just don't get too caught up in the minutia of the conversation, especially if it's something you could always ask later or find out through a little bit of research. Oh my God, they're yelling. Okay, if this video seems super choppy, it's because my kids are like yelling about some video game that they just got. And now my husband's yelling at them. Whatever. When your interview is over, be sure to thank them for their time. And you could also ask what the approximate timeline is for their decision. Also, if you're applying for other schools and they ask, are you considering other positions? You can say yes if you want. I mean, if they think they're going to lose you, a qualified candidate, to another school, they may very well offer you the position on the spot or on a much faster timeline than they initially thought. But ultimately, it's up to you if you want to disclose that information. Also, do your best to remember everyone's name who was part of the interview because you are absolutely going to send a follow-up email after your interview. Here's a dorky thing that I do after I apply for a teaching position and have the interview. I actually write the email right after I've done the interview while I'm sitting in the car. Then I schedule send for an hour or two later. That way, I'm writing things while they're still fresh in my mind, but I have a little bit of buffer time if there's something that pops up that I want to add later or a question I want to ask. You can send individual emails to all of the interviewers, or you can send a group email. It's totally up to you and what you think would be best received. But be sure to thank them for their time and say that you enjoyed learning about the school and are excited for the opportunity. You could also mention a tidbit from the interview, like it was so good to hear about your new garden project. That's always been a passion of mine, and I love hearing about how your school implemented it. Okay, I want to give you a little last bit of advice. I know it can feel intimidating to walk into a room with a bunch of school administrators sitting around a big table, but I want you to also know that every one of those people remember what it was like to be a first-year teacher. Not only have they done it themselves, but they have probably coached dozens or more of first-year teachers in their career. So they know that there are no perfect answers to their questions. What they're really looking for is whether you seem like you're a good fit for the school and also seem like the type of person who genuinely enjoys teaching and is excited for the opportunity to work at their school. When I was a part of the hiring process, I would absolutely take an enthusiastic learner because those types of teachers are the best. Not only do the other teachers love you because you're willing to collaborate, but the kids love you too because your enthusiasm is infectious. So please don't worry about having to prove that you're some sort of expert. Your expertise should be your students, because that's what's going to make you an effective teacher. Additionally, every interview I've gone on as a candidate has taught me something and given me the confidence to go on the next interview. So if you feel a bit nervous going into it, just use it as an opportunity to practice your interviewing skills and to share your experience with others. You might even be surprised at the types of responses you come up with on the spot. And remember, they're rooting for you. One more thing that I wanted to add is I know teaching is hard right now. I mean, like, it's always been hard, but it's a different kind of hard after the pandemic. But after about 18 years of teaching, I also know it can be incredibly rewarding. And I absolutely want to help other educators enter the field of teaching and be successful. It's why I started this channel. And I know it's easy to see all the hard parts of teaching. And I know I definitely fall into that echo chamber, but it's also easy to see the good parts too. So even if you're remotely considering entering the field, please leave your questions and comments below, and I know our community would be happy to assist you. And if you're interested in seeing more teacher prep videos, then check out this one about how to create an awesome teaching portfolio for that upcoming interview you booked. And if you're a new teacher, then check out this playlist curated with videos specifically for your first year in the classroom.